Yes, Scott, I think you have a question.
What is your overall permitting submittal and permit approval schedule for these different agencies?
We have begun the application process and preparing applications for many of the agencies. We recently submitted a pre-construction notification to the Corps of Engineers, and have begun detailed conversations with them regarding construction and mitigation procedures associated with the project. State permits are likely to be filed in June, beginning in June, with applications such as the 401 water quality certificate application, as well as the application for permit to construct the line screens and rivers. After that, we're hoping that review process will likely go towards the fourth quarter of this year, so that we're able to conduct clearing during next winter to avoid potential impacts on species such as the Indiana bat and the migratory birds.
There's going to be a number of threatened endangered species added to the list, probably during your permit sometime in that. How do you plan on, as these species are added in Kentucky, how will you address that?
Well, we met with the Fish and Wildlife Service last spring, and they gave us the indication that several species were likely to be listed, or at least potentially listed, during our review process. So taking that information, we designed several of our surveys to take that into account this past summer. And one of the species that's potentially going to be listed, possibly as early as next fall, is the northern long-eared bat. So as we did surveys for Indiana bat, we collected that much of the same information for that species as well, and characterized along the pipeline route. So it was a very interesting process. I think we just recently submitted that data to the Fish and Wildlife Service last week, and probably constitutes one of the largest data sets that they've ever seen for that.
What about plants? Did you mention
I didn't go into plants in detail. We are working with the Fish and Wildlife Service. We have not completed plant surveys to date, but we have identified some potential habitats along the pipeline route where they may be located, and we plan to conduct those surveys next spring during the flowering period.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else on the question? Chair recognizes Jason.
Yeah. Thank you for the in-depth analysis there. It's a pretty complex topic, so I guess I'll ask a high-level question. I think I've learned in the recent meetings that Army Corps of Engineers mostly focuses on river or stream crossings. What about portions of the pipeline that are crossing, and who has oversight of that, and who's going to be reviewing your permits and documents at the non-stream? I might be wrong. Maybe
No,
Army Corps of Engineers looking at larger portions.
Yes, in general, the Corps of Engineers regulates the activities located within wetlands and water bodies, but they also do regulate those activities in areas immediately adjacent to those as well. But outside of their jurisdiction, many of the state permits will apply to other areas as well, such as construction stormwater permits. Also, the jurisdiction for like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will extend outside of what the Corps' jurisdiction is as well. So, yeah, and same with the state historical preservation office.
Well, you find that, he didn't say it, but they're walking on these surveys, walking every foot of the pipeline. For many of these surveys, it's very, very extensive.
Could you, I'm not very familiar with the role that U.S. Department of Transportation plays in a project like this. I don't know if you want to cover it later or not, but could you give us a brief overview of their role and what they're going to be reviewing?
You want me to take this?
Yes.
Okay, they get more involved in what the design of the pipeline, the construction techniques on the pipeline. We have to cover, the reviewing of the welds, kind of its type of steel for, there's a steel match with the pressures you're gonna operate. And then there's a set of regulations that basically tell us what we have to do. So you have, part of the pipeline is being converted from a natural gas pipe to a natural gas liquids pipe. That's in the ground, so there's a set of regulations that we have to apply to do that under DOT. We've also taken it upon ourselves, between Williams and us, to conduct extensive testing of the pipeline that is kind of above and beyond those regulations to assure ourselves that this pipe is of sound quality. Those tests come back and demonstrate that. So really DOT comes in how we design the project, but, the steel, the engineering, then how it's constructed, the requirements along with construction, and then once it goes into operations, and it takes over, it has control over how the pipeline is operated, what the requirements are, and all the testing, all the inspections, and everything else.
And you'll see that come forward in later presentations, we'll talk about it, so
Stay
stay tuned.
Basically, then the quality control specifications for the line is what we're talking about then.
Yes, that's a simple way of saying it.
Yeah, well, that's how I put it in that
I wish I
bucket for
would've thought of it,
myself.
actually, so.
Anyone else? Yes.
What testing or data is available on repurposing of existing natural gas pipelines and their track record of how, whether they're designed and can perform for NGLs?
You want to do that now, or
Or is that
save it
something
for when we
that-
talk about pipeline?
We can do,
Oh, why don't you just address me?
what we do is, we know based on the type of steel that is in the ground, we have all those records. We know what pressure the pipe we operate at, whether it's a natural gas service or natural gas liquid service. We're not changing the pressure on the existing pipelines as part of this project. So what we're going to do is, as I said, we've run a series of tools through the pipeline to basically inspect the inside of the pipeline, the outside of the pipeline. And so we know what the steel looks like, we know what the condition of the pipe is. We're gonna do some work, we're doing some test digs to make sure that the tools are properly calibrated. Then before we can ever put the pipeline in service, then we will run what is called a hydrostatic test. I saw a slide, and we'll let the engineers explain how the pressure is. But basically, the simple way of putting it is, when we do the hydrostatic test of both the new pipeline and the existing pipeline, it will be at pressures higher than they will ever see in operation. So those are held for a period of 8 hours. So you have surety that that pipeline has integrity, all the welds are good, all the work that you've done on the pipeline is good, and that the pipeline can operate at those pressures.
Is there a track record or a history of information available on how these pipes have performed that have been converted in the past, and how much of it has been converted?
I think that, the pipe that comes quickly to mind is, there's a pipe that comes out of Colorado, goes through Kansas, that was an oil pipeline. It was converted to natural gas, it's called Pony Express. Now it's in the process of being taken back out of natural gas service and converted into an oil pipeline again. So that's probably one of the best examples. Trunkline has had one of its 3 pipelines 10 years ago, 15 years ago now maybe, taken from natural gas service, and I believe it was put in liquids or refined product service. They've had no problems with it. The one thing that, and the engineers can correct me if I misspeak, is if you have good steel, and the steel has high integrity, you can change the conversion as long as you stay with it, understanding the pressures that you're operating with and what that pipeline was designed to hold in terms of pressure. And we've not seen pipelines being converted having those types of issues. But those are the 2 pipelines that come quickly to mind that have been various service for a long period of time without issue.
And as you'll see a little bit later in the presentation, we also talk about some of the asset integrity programs, or what we do to try and ensure that the pipeline stays in good working order and is well cared for. And we have one of our experts here to address hit it.
Yes, Mr. Coleman?
One more question, Mr. Argo. Tell us a little bit more about the third-party inspection on construction, how that works, and do you work with folks like the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service for erosion control? I mean, tell us a bit more about that third-party inspection process.
Yes, these are inspectors that are hired by Bluegrass to oversee construction of the pipeline. They work independently from the contractor and do not have any sort of direct reporting authority over the contractor. And they have stop work authority as well if they see something that's out of compliance. Those inspectors will work with the other, other agencies regulating the project, as they will likely have inspectors that perform site visits as well. And we'll work closely to work with those members of the agencies to address their areas of concern.
But our inspection just doesn't stop there. I mean, it also, and you'll hear a little bit about it later, it starts at the mill, where we're observing how the pipe is being, and testing the pipe as it's rolling off the mill. So then, and Blaine Pritchard will touch upon that in a bit.
I just seized on your comment you'll be doing clearing during the winter. Of course, that's the highly loadable period of time and pretty rough in rain, so I want to make sure that you have good inspectors as far as erosion control.
Yes, clearing is from an environmental standpoint, one of the very most important times that we need to be out there inspecting. As I stated, we would like to clear during next winter, but that's, we do not plan to grub or the right of way at that time. We would be leaving the stumps in place over the winter, which will, help us reduce the potential for erosion. Also, as soon as we clear and have the right of way established, we immediately install erosion control devices as well.
Any other questions from the commission? Turn back over to you guys.
Great, what we'd like to do now is, thank you, Russ, did very good, is get into one of the other issues that has received a lot of notoriety, and that is, we here in the Bluegrass region are proud of our Bluegrass region, and in large part because of the geomorphology. The topography is karst. The limestone is what makes Central Kentucky. We're all aware of that, and Golder Associates is studying that, and I think you'd be very impressed with the level of detail that's going on in order to protect those resources. So, Brent Waters from Golder.
Thank you. This first slide, well, first, what we're looking at are geohazards and geotechnical aspects of the project, and including landslides, subsidence from karst, subsidence from underground mines, a variety of different other features, characteristics of the soil, depth of bedrock, and this information will be used in the design and construction of the pipeline to both ensure protection of the environment and to ensure the safety of the pipeline. This first picture, I just wanted to highlight the fact that both Boardwalk and Williams have thousands of miles of pipeline, much of that through areas of karst. And the areas in red shown on the map on the right, as you can see, there are large portions of the country that are underlain by karst. And what I mean by karst are areas underlain by limestone, and in most climatic conditions, at least especially within the eastern part of the U.S., limestone will dissolve under natural recharge of rainwater. And when it dissolves, it produces voids, which are then backfilled basically with the soil, and can cause subsidence and sinkholes. It also produces caves and vulnerable aquifer systems, karst aquifer systems. And so the karst is an especially, let me move to the next slide, is an especially sensitive feature in Kentucky. There's about, including the boardwalk, I believe there's about 250 miles of pipeline through Kentucky, and about a quarter of that will be going over areas of
karst, areas of karst potential. That's in the, shown in the darker red on that map. And you can see that the pipeline has been routed to avoid the areas, the major areas of karst across the state. Especially you can see here in Frankfurt, it's moving outside to the extent possible, outside of the major Ordovician Aquifer, mineral Ordovician limestone areas surrounding Lexington and Frankfurt, and then Elizabethtown. So I also like to point out that utilities such as Bluegrass Pipeline are constructed over karst areas and have been constructed over karst areas for decades, as have schools, highways, road, gasoline stations, a variety of other features and structures built over karst. So I think in general, the community is very used to how to deal with karst and how to construct over karst areas. The next slide is, I want to talk a little bit about the investigation that we've been involved with. We started with an initial phase of very detailed mapping of karst features using very high resolution LiDAR imagery, which is basically a digital elevation mapping of the surface. And with that, we identified karst features, subsidence features, closed circular depressions that you can see on elevation models of the land surface. And the state, Kentucky has probably one of the best digital databases of sinkholes. The Kentucky Geologic Survey has mapped tens of thousands of sinkholes throughout the state, and we mapped sinkholes and karst features along the 1,000-foot corridor surrounding the pipeline. We identified 900 new sinkholes that had not been identified previously by the Kentucky Geologic Survey, and have used this map to identify areas that required additional investigation. So the areas that, one more second on that, the areas that we've identified as for further investigation are areas where the pipeline crosses actual sinkholes. We identified about 150 sinkholes crossed by the pipeline and grouped those into about 50 areas across Kentucky where we did additional geophysical investigation. Go ahead. So we're using state-of-the-art electrical resistivity imaging, which we lay out thousands of feet of electrical cable across the sinkholes along the pipeline alignment and inject electricity in the ground and then model how that electricity travels through the ground and model the electrical resistivity of the subsurface. And what that allows us to do, and what we're doing with that, is we're mapping the thickness of the soil, the top of the bedrock, and any karst features such as voids, either air-filled voids, water-filled voids, caves, and pinnacle bedrock. So the profile there on the bottom of the slide shows an area just west of Elizabeth, southwest of Elizabethtown. We've conducted about 30,000 linear feet of geophysical surveys at this point, and we're in the process of processing and analyzing that data. But it gives us a lot of information that will then be used by the design engineers to both for the design of the materials for the pipeline and other geotechnical aspects of building the pipeline, as well as identifying other sensitive features within the pipeline alignment, along the pipeline alignment, such as caves, springs, and public water supplies. And this information then will be used also for, how the pipeline, how Bluegrass will deal with emergency response and spills. And that will be addressed here in a little bit. And that's it.
Question on that, you say 30,000 linear feet, 5 miles roughly, is that scattered throughout where you had areas that were suspect?
Right, so it's
32 maps.
50 different areas, and of those 50 different areas, we did not get access to all 50 different areas, at least to date. And most of it is in those dark pink areas, in the Elizabethtown, west of Elizabethtown area, and up in this area. And we just finished up those surveys, just a couple weeks ago in the snow.
Ms. Martha?
This may be covered in the later part of the presentation, so it is, if it is, you can let me know. But your slide says that you're gonna use the information on determining the karst areas to just change your design methods on pipelines going through those areas. How do you change your construction methods in pipeline going across karst areas? And how do you account for the fact that, a sinkhole may not be located in a particular place now, but there'll be a sinkhole there 5 years from now, because we all know that constantly changes. So
Right.
how does your design account for the constantly changing, geology?
That's a good question. So when we designed the plan, we had to come up with an idea that recognized the fact that we couldn't do all 180 miles of survey across the entire state. We wanted to really focus it on the areas that were most underlain by the highest potential for karst. As far as as like Russ said, rerouting and minimizing areas where the pipeline goes over karst is one method. And that's the first method. Of course, in areas like you saw on that previous map, that are underlain by numerous karst features, you can't necessarily reroute around them. So then there's ways that the engineers will design the pipeline, and they may design the pipeline through these areas that have higher karst potential, regardless of whether we even saw a sinkhole beneath one. You know, if there's a sinkhole beneath the pipeline, we're gonna try to avoid it. And the engineering to strengthen the steel, you make the steel thicker, you can put structural foundations to support longer spans, where if a sinkhole did occur, the pipeline would survive a collapse feature. And there's other ways of draining around the pipeline, draining the fill material, the type of fill material you use, the type of trench that you do, and what you backfill it with. There are methods to make it an intrinsically safer pipeline over areas that where there may be land movement. And we're doing the same thing with the landslides as well, and over underground lines, where you might have movement of the earth.
And
We
when-
can hear more about our construction and design, efforts, and there's one in between.
Just one follow-up then. Of all of the different regulatory agencies that you talked about that would be providing oversight, which of those agencies provides the oversight for the kinds of things you're talking about there as far as the choice and the design for pipeline going through karst areas?
Anybody?
Yeah, the Federal Department of Transportation, in their regulations, have regulations related to geohazard areas or other hazard areas.
And does that cover the entire pipeline?
Yes, it's federal, since it's an interstate pipeline, it is regulated by PHMSA,
And so what agency will use that?
U.S. Department of Transportation.
It's pipeline safety hazards and materials Texas Gas has pipe that goes up to overflow area. And that pipe was built in, depending on, I think it was in the early sixties, or late fifties. And we've had several sinkholes that have appeared around that pipe from time to time, and we've never had any integrity issue with that pipe. I think as I'll talk to you later about, one of the things that we want you to come away with is when people think about pipes, they think of a lot of them, these are heavy steel pipelines, big equipment needed to move. They are not rigid. They have movement in them, they have flexibility in them. So they can withstand, some sudden impacts such as a sinkhole develop. So it's not like a sinkhole developed, it's an automatic failure. That's not the case at all. In our pipeline, going Bowling Green is a good example of dealing with this issue where you have a sinkhole occurred right over the pipeline, the integrity of the pipeline is not threatened, there was no leak. These pipelines are a lot stronger, have more flexibility than most people think.
Yes.
Well, I really appreciate all the in-depth analysis. It's, I'm familiar with JS and IR, and it's great to be able to bring those technologies to bear in this day and age. One concern that's been kind of raised, and once again, I'm learning this stuff, pretty new to this stuff. Can you talk a little bit, one of the features of karst is the ability to move anything, if there was a rupture or any type of leak, the ability to move those liquids very quickly over long distances and into unexpected territories that makes cleanup or, I know we'll probably get into that later, but could you just talk a little bit about the characteristics of karst, at least from that angle of its movement of liquids very quickly underground into different areas, and are you guys mapping, do you have an understanding of, from your data of how that would move if there was a safety issue, like what communities that seem very far outside the pipeline might be impacted under a safety issue? And you guys might address this later, but.
Well, I think we are addressing spill and spill contingency and emergency plans and other speakers, but as far as karst and groundwater movement, because the nature of the karst, the secondary openings within the rock that dissolve and open wider, it can produce velocities and movement of water in the subsurface that approach that of what you would see in a river on the surface. So you've got to look at that, and you've got to think about if a spill did occur, any spill from any source, if it gets down into a karst aquifer system, it could not only travel fairly far, fairly fast, but it could go in directions that you wouldn't expect it to go in. So it's a very complex environment, and the idea of this investigation is more on the construction end, but what we're doing to add to it, add to our investigation, is to look at the wellhead protection or source water recharge areas around springs and wells along the pipeline route, and then identify those as sensitive karst areas. And so in these sensitive karst areas where there's actual surface expressions of karst features, actual collapse, sinkholes, and springs and public water supplies, these will be highlighted, and again, you go back to then what do you do about it? Do you build a stronger pipe? Do you reroute? Do you add spill contingency plans with the local fire department that can act very quickly? But that knowledge, if it happens, if a spill occurred in this area, we know where the groundwater is going, and that's primarily because the Kentucky Geologic Survey has done just a fantastic job in mapping out through dye tracing and other mechanisms mapped out the groundwater basins. And they haven't completed all the areas, but they've completed most of the areas in these sensitive portions of where the pipeline's going. So we'll be relying pretty heavily on that information.
In these areas that are shown here on this karst map, are you crossing areas that have CARS features that carry an underground river? Or are you missing Mammoth Cave, how far?
Yeah, always, there's, mostly what we're mapping are surface expressions of cars, so, but we're not mapping necessarily, underground with the LiDAR work. We're not mapping underground cave systems or water systems, aquifer flow systems, but what we are doing with the geophysics is we're able to map those types of subsurface features down to about 100 feet. So beneath the pipeline, in these areas where we have known karst features, we're mapping the subsurface to about 100 feet. The routing areas, the initial routing obviously took into account karst areas. You can see it how the pipeline's routed, and it does, of course, miss Mammoth Caves, doesn't go anywhere near there. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Ordinarily, we would move right into taking the recommendations from the geotechnical surveys to the engineers and how they do the design work. But we needed to break out a portion to talk about, because although these things are happening concurrently, the landowner identification issues, the landowner surveys, which allow us to do a lot of this work, and the permission and then the easement process. I will say, and I spoke to Ms. Gadsden about it previously, I know probably some of the questions might be related to property acquisitions and eminent domain. We cannot discuss it. That issue is a matter of in litigation right now, and we won't discuss it since it is a matter of litigation. But nevertheless, we will talk about how we go about it and what we're doing with landowners in regards to easement acquisition. And Rob Hawksworth is responsible for that part of the project.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Once a proposed route for the pipeline is identified, and that's when we go to work to identify the landowners that we would be proposing to cross, whose property we would be crossing. Then the next step would be to obtain survey permission from those landowners in order to be able to conduct the myriad of surveys that we've talked about so far tonight. And then the next step after that, if it looks like the route will still cross those particular landowners, or which landowners it crosses, then we would move into the process of acquiring easements and negotiating easements with those landowners. As far as identifying landowners for this project so far, we have over 2,100 tracts of land that we're crossing on this on the entire new build of this Bluegrass Pipeline project. Nearly 800 of those are in the state of Kentucky. We went through the survey permission process with them in order to be able to conduct the surveys that we've talked about already. And last fall, we moved into the acquisition phase as far as negotiating with landowners to obtain easements for constructing the pipeline across the property. As far as the status of that easement acquisition today, over 50% of the project as a whole has been acquired as far as negotiating easements with landowners. And in the state of Kentucky, 65% of the tracts crossing in Kentucky have been negotiated, have been closed. That to date represents nearly $31 million paid directly to landowners so far. By the way, I understand that the Commission has inquired about the effect of a pipeline on property values, home mortgage terms and conditions possibly, and homeowners insurance. In building and operating the nearly 30,000 miles that between our two companies, Boardwalk and Williams, have, we're unaware of any data, any information that shows any adverse impact to property values, or on home mortgage requirements. As a matter of fact, there have been, we've done some research and gotten some studies on that fact. With respect to one study done here recently from Naris Advisors LLC, there was a study entitled Pipelines and Property Values, an eclectic review of the literature. It was first published in February 2012 and then later published in the Journal of Real Estate Literature in the fall of 2012. Researchers found in that study that our review of studies of the effects of pipeline on property values indicates there's no systematic evidence based on actual sales data that proximity to pipelines reduces property values. In fact, a 2001 national case study revealed no significant impact on property sales located along pipelines. This study also revealed that there were no significant impacts on the demand for properties within a geographically diverse area covered by this study, and that the presence of a pipeline did not impede development of the surrounding properties. This 2001 Interstate Natural Gas Association of America Foundation, or INGA, study that was entitled Natural Gas Pipeline Impact Study was conducted over several years and included data from both rural and suburban areas. The ultimate finding of the study was that proximity to pipelines has no discernible impact on real estate values. With respect to the impact on homeowner insurance rates, again, it's been our experience that insurance underwriters have not considered the presence of the transmission pipeline when determining the cost and coverage of property insurance. In October of 2011, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission made the statement on the slide here relative to a northeastern U.S. pipeline project regarding the potential for insurance premium adjustments associated with pipeline proximity. Insurance advisors consulted on other natural gas projects by FERC have indicated the pipeline infrastructure does not affect homeowner insurance rates.
So, that's kind of the story. I think it's compelling, notwithstanding the information that we're hearing. 65% of the pipeline in Kentucky, the easements have already been acquired, which is a rather compelling number. Mr. Chairman, do you have any questions in regards to any of this information?
Yes, Chair Recognize Jason.
I just want to ask on the easements. Obviously, you guys the money's going to people that the pipeline goes directly across their land. But what about properties that are directly adjacent to the property, sometimes 10, 20 feet away from the pipeline, but it's not on their property? What kind of compensation are those landowners being offered, or are they seen? I know with wind projects and other types of energy development projects, oftentimes the impacted landowners around are also wind from noise abatement and things are also compensated. How are you guys approaching that? What are your kind of thoughts and ideas on that?
First of all, the easement width is a 50-foot permanent pipeline width and 100 feet for construction. So there shouldn't be any incident of 10 to 20 foot proximity from a neighbor to the pipeline route that's on their neighbor. But in that respect, of course, the effect of construction is temporary in nature. The pipeline is buried throughout the route. And so at this point, there are no plans or we do not work with adjacent landowners for any additional compensation there.
If you think about it from a broad context, it's different than a wind farm. You won't see it, you won't hear it, or anything like that. It's underground, it's quietly moving products to the market.
We'll get there, but in the case of a spillage or leak, that could a local small leak that could affect local land, water, well rights and stuff, that would have a larger impact. That's where I was drawing to win. They can have that impact, but we'll get there, I'm sure. So thank you. That's really helpful.
Any other questions from the I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Any other questions from the commission? Guys, go ahead and proceed.
All right, thank you. Well, now we're put in reverse a little bit. So you heard about the geotechnical analysis and the site conditions that we're dealing with, those, and that information along with federal standards and good engineering practices and the way these folks do business lead to the pipeline design and engineering and construction techniques. And we're gonna do that with a series of speakers. So, where are you? Oh, yeah. Lane Pritchett is the manager of engineering and construction. This guy's gonna talk more engineering than you're ready to hear. I want you to get your calculators out on you. We're gonna talk some details here on the steel pipeline itself. So, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bill. Well, as it's previously been stated, Department of Transportation, PHMSA are kind of used interchangeably, but they have jurisdiction over the engineering design of this pipeline. Bluegrass will be purchasing up to almost 700 miles of pipe. And PHMSA's requirement for Bluegrass is that we specify pipe that meets the API or American Petroleum Institute specification 5L. And that standard is a very mature standard or specification. It was initially written in the 1920s. It's on its 44th edition. Bluegrass takes that spec and writes their own specification. We call it our line pipe specification. The purpose of the spec is to go out to market and source and procure pipe that meets the Bluegrass spec, in addition to the API 5L. So the Bluegrass spec is an enhancement to that API spec. It's very mature. Within the API 5L specification are two product specification levels, PSL1 and PSL2. The Bluegrass specification specifies PSL2 versus PSL1. PSL2 is an enhanced version that addresses material composition, weldability of the pipe, and sharp impact requirements. Over and above that, the Bluegrass specification specifies a fracture control qualification test to ensure that the pipe has the properties necessary to mitigate a ductile fracture propagation. In addition to that, Bluegrass specification specifies manufacturing procedure qualification tests over and above that of API 5L federal requirements. For example, on the first day of production of 24-inch pipe with a specific grade and wall thickness, first 50 pipes come off the production line. We'll pull 4 of those pipes and do a rigorous EQC on those pipes to ensure they meet the requirements. And Bluegrass will source pipe from an American mill. And that mill has to meet the requirements of API. It has to be a certified mill. It has to have a rigorous QA/QC program. It's audited every 3 years. It's licensed. And throughout the manufacturing process, Bluegrass will hire third-party inspectors to sit in that mill and monitor the production of the pipe from the initial roll all the way to that last piece of pipe being shipped out. Some of the pipe thicknesses we're talking about for a 24-inch pipe, for example, at a railroad crossing, pipe will be at least a half-inch thick, unless the railroad authority dictates otherwise. Above ground pipe, for a pump station, a 24-inch pipe will be 11/16 of an inch thick. PHMSA or DOT dictates a design factor, it could be also referred to as a safety factor. And when we determine pipe wall thickness based upon the diameter of pipe we're using, the minimum yield strength of the pipe, and the maximum operating pressure. And across the board, the federal standard, or DOT or PHMSA standard, says that the design factor should be 0.72. In many cases, Bluegrass exceeds that minimum requirement. some people may see this table and think those smaller numbers, having a smaller number mean it's a better safety factor. Well, if you do the math and manipulate the formula that we have on the screen here, you should come to the conclusion that the smaller number actually means a larger safety factor or design factor. So for example, on a railroad crossing, federal standard or DOT says 0.72 design factor. We're using a 0.5. It's a 44% increase over the federal standard. And if you look at the table, that's an example of, in many cases, where we exceed federal standard. So the benefits of an increased design factor are a public safety, where the pipe comes out of the ground, you have a heavier wall pipe. For pipeline integrity and worker safety, we provide a safer environment with a heavier wall pipe. In addition to sourcing pipe from U.S. pipe mills, that mill will also more than likely be coating the pipe, or it'll be shipped off to another U.S. mill for coating. And the purpose of the external coating that's shown in the picture is it's our primary defense against external corrosion. And there is a secondary defense against external corrosion, that's clogging protection. PHMSA or DOT specifies we have mainline valves, and they specify in the section noted that we have to hydrostatically shell and C-test our valves without leakage. And Bluegrass again references API 6D according to PHMSA and DOT, and we write a spec that exceeds requirements of API 6D in terms of manufacturing, quality control, and testing procedures. And this, much like the pipe, we will have an inspector in the shop monitoring the production of the valves. And we're talking on the order of about 250 valves at 24-inch, 20-inch diameter. And the purpose of these valves is they're strategically located to detect population areas, unusually sensitive areas, environmentally sensitive areas. And many of those valves in those particular locations are motor-operated valves. And those motor-operated valves can be controlled from the pipeline center in Tulsa. So that in the event there is a leak, that we can immediately isolate that section and sections beyond to minimize the impact of the leak. Those valves are spaced at approximately 5 to 10 mile spacing, depending upon the location. And they're subject to annual inspections in accordance with PHMSA or DOT requirements.
Let me ask you this before we get into the construction. Are there any questions related to the steel itself, the coating? One thing you didn't mention about the coating. Tell us about the coating a little bit.
The coating applied in the mill is a fusion bonded epoxy coating. In the mill process, they sandblast the pipe to near white, right through a heater, heat the pipe up, apply the FBD coating to it, and it's cured and produced in a mass manner.
Mr. Christian, will take any questions related to the steel and pipeline specs.
Actually, I've got some questions on that. That's, the engineering world is kind of where I'm at, so I'm kind of interested. A couple questions you mentioned in the beginning, on testing the integrity of the existing pipeline itself that's out there today. The drag on the interior surfaces of the pipe, have you guys noticed any decrease in the thickness of the pipe relative to the drag inside the pipe of the materials that have historically gone through that line? And if so, what plan do you have in place for replacing those specific sections?
Well, I'll give you a non-engineering answer, all of you guys behind me figures out what the right engineering.
Well, I saw some eyebrows raised up like, okay, wait a minute, he said something about inside diameter piping, okay.
So what we've done, as I described earlier, is we run a series of tools, primarily designed to see if there's any corrosion, any internal anomalies, any that type of defect in pipe.
Okay.
To the extent we find an anomaly where both of us determine that this needs to be removed, we'll go in, cut out that section pipe and replace the section pipe. But, so what we're trying to do before we ever get to kind of the phasing of running a hydrostatic test is understanding what we have. For example, you may have an anomaly on the inside, but you may find out that somebody is hitting your pipe at some point, and you find a dent in the pipe. And we may say, even though it meets certain specifications, it's safe, we may say we want to take it out. So we'll go through, once we start the reconditioning the pipeline, we take care of that. Some of those we may have to replace. We find a piece of pipe that has a significant anomaly right now, so we'll take that part of the pipeline out of service and replace it immediately.
Okay.
So that's part of it. I can't answer your drag question, but that's the rigor which we're going through to make sure.
Well, essentially, you have answered it. I guess that's what I was looking for, is it's been my experience that on the OD of a pipe, you can have something that looks, or ID, I should say, would look fine, but in actuality, it's either been struck on the outside, or you've got corrosion on the outside of the pipe, while it hasn't necessarily impacted the integrity and your wall thickness on the inside, you can kind of get there. So, yeah, you actually did get where I was going.
Well, the other thing we've done is we're in the process of running what is known as closed-hole survey, which is basically where you're walking the pipeline and checking the level of contact protection on the pipe, looking for corrosion in addition to what the normal test requirements are for pipe protection.
Well, speaking of that, the cathodic protection for a moment also, that was one of my other questions I had. Historically, how often, after you do your initial cathodic protection study, and you get everything connected, your grounding cables and everything, how often are you gonna go back and re-verify those?
The DOT actually has a set of requirements on it.
So that's what you'll be using, the DOT-driven requirement?
And then there may be areas that, we have soil, I mean, I think both of us probably do this on other pipelines. If you have a pipe in the area where you have bad soil, you may test it more often than what's required, just because you want to make sure that you.
So that'll be rolled into part of your plan, and I mean to interrupt, but you'll include that as part of your overall plan, depending upon where you're at, the soil configurations and what you have. You may actually test more than, if I'm here, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to understand for myself. You may actually test more, some specific sections, depending upon what you're dealing with.
You can hear about that in a little while.
I'm sorry.
Soils, for example, mining soils.
Right. Right.
Can I add to that just a little bit?
Yes.
We are required to, check the levels of product protection annually.
Right.
Although that's required. In addition to that, we also monitor the rectifiers, is what provides the current to make the product protection. We continuously monitor those. And if one goes down, you don't immediately see the depolarization. But we get an indication that the rectifier went down, and the technician will call out immediately to correct that situation before the pipe polarizes.
Thank you.
I think similar to what Bluegrass would be that we currently operate, we have two technicians that corrosion control all of it.
Okay.
Have an A certification, so forth and so on. They don't provide any other, maintenance activities on that 1,100-mile pipeline system other than monitoring corrosion.
I mean, to take up all the question time here. On the transitions, I guess one of the questions I had was kind of getting along the lines of drag, but it really becomes a point or a big player when you're talking about transitions, elbows, if you will, where, even as you know as well as I do, even a few degree change in your longitude that you're running on a line can affect the inside integrity of that line. How often, or what is going to be your wall thickness for those transition areas, or will it be the same uniformly, or?
It will be the same, but erosional velocity, it sounds like, is your
Right.
concern. And in a pipeline, we don't have sharp bends.
Right.
So like a 90-degree bend might be 1.5 diameter bend.
Okay.
We cannot install 1.5 D bend for the reason that you can't run a smart tool through a sharp bend like that. So erosional velocity is a concern in a pipeline, but we need to do that.
And then finally, last question, for the corrosion protection that you're going to put on the outside of the pipe, obviously, when it's being extruded, non-welded line, if you will, whenever you go through, how are you gonna make repairs to that coating out in the field?
Good question. So pipe coating does get damaged in the mill and through transportation all the way to the job site. So, before the pipe's installed in the ditch, they jeep the pipe, so they run an electrical current around the pipe, detects voids and holidays in the coating. Those are marked in the field by inspectors and pipeline contractors. They apply a field 50 coating back over.
And for those of you who don't know what a Jeep is, think of a great big slinky that goes around the pipeline with electric current through it.
You know, the first time I heard that term, I was envisioning a Jeep. You know, and I was like, no, that's how, actually how it was described to me, as a giant slinky.
Right.
So,
You want me to call it a clinky?
yeah. Because later on, it'll be one of those, it'll be,
Oh,
Okay.
anyone else on the commission? I'm sorry. Yes, Scott.
I forgot.
Is there any magic in this 5 to 10 mile spacing on your mainline valves? It seems to me that that's a lot of volume that you could lose there, and if you're going through some sensitive areas where you can tighten those up, or how does that work?
So this is where GIS is very useful. So in GIS, we can look at the pipeline center line and overlay population boundaries, overlay drinking water sources, and you can look at it visually and spatially to determine where valve placement should be placed to protect those sensitive areas. And, I use 5 to 10 mile spacing, but it could be on a populated area. It could be on both sides of the populated area to protect that population area. And as I said, those valves are typically motor-operated valves, so we can close them quickly. So it's a detailed analysis to place valves, protect sensitive areas.
The other question I've got relating to the valves is, you mentioned that your control point was Tulsa. Is there anything, a backup or something in Kentucky that ensures that if there is a problem in Tulsa or a problem here, that you can work around?
Good question. I don't know where the backup control center is.
The backup control center, the one in Tulsa, is in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. If there's any problems at the control center there in the Williams offices, they would move to that alternate control center, which is about 12 miles away. So from a weather perspective, and then also there will be people located at field locations that would be a backup to products associated with that.
Just to put it in perspective, you saw the maps in Williams, their control centers in Tulsa for all their pipelines. Our control center for all of our pipelines, which are more heavily weighted on the Gulf Coast, is in Owensboro. So we moved ours up to Owensboro primarily to keep it away from hurricanes. So it is not unusual for pipeline operators to have their control centers a long way from where some of their pipes are. And that has not been a problem for any of